Hi everybody, we're going to continue with chapter 33, Willie the Goat's Surprise. Spring came on fast. 1 week flurries, then the graft was tufting up like quilting, and there were, small yellow flowers. Around the barn, chickens were clucking and hurrying about on business. The uproar for a new egg erupted twice, sometimes 3 times a day. Tractors were out. There were trucks on the highway carrying seed potatoes to the new-turned fields. The horses were rubbing heavily against anything to shed their winter hair. Swallows soared in and out, chattering and calling, gathering horsehair and straw for nests. The nervous Phoebe built above the barn door again and scolded every time Bernie or the kids passed underneath. Quick pause to talk about context clues. I don't know if you've heard of a Phoebe before. It's not something that I'm very familiar with in terms of a creature. But judging by the context clues, it's something that builds above the barn door and makes a noise when the people pass underneath. I'm assuming that a Phoebe is a bird. I think if you Google it, you'll find the same. So that might also be interesting for my friends' lovers. The goat was edgy. He was growing rounder and rounder. Bernie scolded Al for feeding him so much. "That goat's gonna burst the way you're spoiling him," he growled. Then one day the goat did burst. And there was a baby goat, white and wobbly. Bernie rushed back to the station and yelled, "Al, you're an uncle!" Willie became Wilhelmina. Abby named the baby Theo after a boy she liked at school. And there you can see Wilhelmina and Theo. No, it's not very focused. Let's see. Okay. As goats go, Wilhelmina was a loving mother. Theo sought her out for what he needed and got it. He would have done fine without any outside help, but in the eyes of Havy and the lady, Wilhelmina was barely up to the job. Havy remembered her pups, and the lady thought about children too. The presence of a not quite helpless youngster touched their maternal instincts. They took over Theo like 2 old aunts who had feuded in the past, but at last agreed on one big thing. Whittington had ended Havy's attacks on the lady. Theo made them allies. Havy sniffed and licked the newcomer from end to end on their first meeting and scrubbed him every day thereafter. Somehow, the more helpless the animal, the gentler Havy became. Whatever she'd had to get even about, she'd forgotten. As for the lady, she had a new student to instruct in the matter of tender greens, things not to get into in the back of the barn, and the history of everyone. Theo was a good student, but he jumped. The lady would be going on when suddenly he'd spring straight up and spin around. He meant no rudeness. That's what young goats do. The effect of this unique upbringing was to make Theo more careful about his appearance than most goats and picky about his food. He also got quite a high opinion of himself because Al told him everything he had learned about goats in the library. If you've forgotten who Al is, he is the man who works at the Texaco with Bernie, and he's the one who bought Willie, now Wilhelmina, and so therefore he's kind of like Theo's grandpa, if you wanted to consider that as a kind of like relationship. For all the ladies instructing, Theo never learned to drink tidily like a duck. Havy's efforts to teach him to run like a dog didn't take either. Right after they'd started chase together, the kid would shoot up, twiddle his legs, and then dash off somewhere else. Coragio's singing lessons were more successful. Theo would join the rooster at dawn with a long, deep baa. Their music made Bernie smile as he drove in. Chapter 34. Dick sees the girl in black again. Dick Whittington was in Ben's dreams and daydreams. School was in his nightmares. For all Abby's work in the barn, he was still behind his classmates. While he'd been making progress, they had been too. They were getting further and further ahead. One afternoon, the cat noticed that the boy was tired and angry. "What's up?" he asked. "In reading, some guy teased me. Said I sounded like an air compressor. I slugged him." There was a cheer from the rats. "I got sent home. It's not fair." "What about the classes with Coach O?" the cat asked. "Dr. Parker says I'll have to go all summer. Everybody would know." "In school, everybody knows everything about everybody anyway," Abby said. "They'll say things," Ben growled. There was a heavy silence. The horses chewed and made the thoughtful snuffling noises horses make sometimes. The chickens dozed. The goats were indifferent. Goats don't think much about anybody else. "You're stuck," the lady said. "Stay where you are, and what's going to happen?" The rats were rooting for the boy to sign up. The old one fixed Ben with his one bright bead eye and said, "I would if I could. From what I've heard out of Abby's books, there's more world out there in books than in this barn and field and all of Northfield 10 times over." The cat gave Ben a long look. "The boy in my home before didn't have your chance." Maybe it was then that Ben decided to take his chance. He didn't say anything. He made a fist. Whittington jumped up to his storytelling place. He waited until Ben relaxed his hand. He knew the boy wouldn't be able to hear anything until he did. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. Think about why Ben would need to relax his hand before Whittington knew that he was ready to listen to Whittington's story. As I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking that maybe Ben was so stuck and focused on his anger and his frustration that he wouldn't have been able to really focus on Whittington's story. And the sign of Ben finally relaxing his hand showed Whittington that he had at least let go of it enough to focus on something else. And maybe even Whittington's story would be a nice distraction for him right now.
Dick's old friend, the coachman who'd brought him down to London years before, had reappeared. He'd been sent by Sir Lewis with a book. Dick was to go to Sir Lewis's the next evening, having read it. He's been up all night reading Marco Polo's travels. He finished it just before he set out. The cat went along. She'd recovered from her operation, but she was limping. She was too proud to be carried, so the young man walked slowly. He was 18 now, tall and strong, clean-shaved, with a chiseled face, deep blue eyes, and long curling blonde hair. There was a thin white scar across his right cheek. As the cat hobbled along behind him, passerby thought it cruel that the fine gentleman didn't bother to pick up the devoted pet limping at his heels. Dick knew the bite he'd get if he tried. In fact, the cat was walking better and better. Will let them in. Sir Lewis's house was ablaze with candles. As a quick reminder, Will is that friend who was also his carriage driver, and he's the one that then passed on Marco Polo's book called Travels to him. And so he works directly for Sir Lewis, just in case you've forgotten. Dick was shown to the old man's study. The cat slipped in on her own. There was a fire in the room. Sir Lewis was in his green coat with the fur collar turned up. Maps were spread out on every table. Fitzwarren was there, the captain of the Unicorn, some other gentlemen Dick did not recognize, and Sir Lewis's granddaughter, the slim young woman in black Dick had seen twice before. There were introductions. The strange men were 3 old sea dogs, ship captains who'd had experience sailing the Dardanelles and the Bosporus. The sailing charts belonged to them. Some might not have found the girl beautiful, but Dick could hardly breathe for looking at her. She was tall, with long black hair that gleamed in the candlelight. She had a quick smile. Her eyes were bright and lively like a bird's eyes. Her mouth was large. She had a fine nose. She felt his stare and reddened, the pink showing under the faint olive cast of her skin. She slipped from the room like a shadow. The cat followed her. Dick jumped up. "My cat," he said. In the dim passage, he bumped into the cat. You are my cat." His tongue wouldn't work. "In the pantry," she said, laughing.
"She smells the force meat."
She took his hand.
"This way."
Her silks rustled softly. Dick could smell her hair, her rose scent. In the candle-lit pantry they found the cat. She was waiting for them on a servant's stool. It was as if she led them on. She wasn't eating. The girl picked her up and stroked her. "I'm Dick Whittington," he said.
"I know," she replied. "Grandfather speaks of you." "I'm Mary Green."
"Yes," he said. He had 100 things to say, but he couldn't speak. For a moment, the only sound was the cat's purr.
"We must go back,"
Mary said. Her voice was low. To Dick, it was like music. "May I see you again?" he asked. She looked down and shook her head.
"No."
Pale and shaken, Dick rejoined the party. What the talking came to was this. Sir Lewis wanted Dick to sail with a shipload of English woolens and German salt and establish a factor or agency for trade at Constantinople. If he could make it into Persia, he was to establish another station at Tabriz. He would be retracing part of Marco Polo's route. Sir Lewis had a charter from his friend and debtor, King Edward. Not that a piece of handsomely written on parchment with ribbons and red wax seals would carry much weight with sea pirates, viziers, pashas, and the sultan who controlled the narrow blue straits that separate Europe and Asia. They would need cajoling with gold. Dick would have gold. The men said that if he could open agencies in those places, it would be a great thing for England. Each of them had a share in the venture. If Dick succeeded, it would be a great thing for them too. "Your share will be enough to make you rich beyond the dreams of avarice," said one of the captains. "And you'll be risking no capital of your own." "Except your life," said Fitzwarren, almost to himself. A day before, an hour before, the young man's blood would have thrilled to talk of trade and silk routes, gold and glory for England and himself. But now he could hardly pay attention. He was burning. He kept looking for the girl. The talk droned on until at last the men progressed to dinner. Mary joined the party. The cat settled in her lap as servants passed cold beef tongue and horseradish sauce, peas and lard, small birds roasted in pastry, a soup of berries, sweet white wine, dishes of shaved ice with red syrup. Dick ate nothing. He couldn't swallow. His eyes were like lions for that girl. He took in her face, the shade of her cheeks, the graceful way she moved with not a motion wasted. He could just make out her body, young and firm, the body of a girl who walked miles and rode her own horse. Her eyes were on him too, although he didn't know it. She was discreet in her looking. His cat purred and purred, kneading the girl's thigh the way cats do to say something. Had Mary been able to understand Dick's cat, it would have told her. Love comes in at the eyes.
Chapter 35. Marker raids the barn. The dog that lived in the house at the top of the farm road was a coal and chocolate border collie with a blunt brown muzzle and white paws. Marker was bred for herding, but he had no training. He didn't get much exercise. He was frantic to run and chase. His one delight was going out early with his mistress. Sometimes she walked him toward the barn. He wanted nothing more than to herd that crowd. One morning he slipped his leash and tore down the farm road. He took a turn through the paddock to send the horses running, as he'd watched Havy do so many times. Then he swept into the barn. The lady scooted deep into the dark back under the junk. Brahms flew high with the screeching bantams. Coragio was struggling to get up on his hay bale when the dog got him by the neck. Feathers was flying like somebody emptying a pillow when Wilhelmina butted Marker broadside so hard the rooster was blown free. Coragio staggered and collapsed. The dog was struggling up when the cat sprang, clawing his eyes. As Marker's mistress came shrieking to his rescue, Wilhelmina slammed him again. He was carried whimpering up the hill. When Bernie showed up, he knew something was wrong. Nobody was out. It was silent in the barn. Everybody was standing around Coragio. He lay where he'd fallen. The tall man stooped and shook his head. "Nature is mean," he muttered. There was no blood. Havy nosed the body. Bernie kicked the dog. "Leave it alone," he said. But Havy kept nuzzling the limp rooster and licking him. Coragio stirred, raised his head, flopped back, then struggled to get up. He couldn't. The tall man's face was a study in wonder as he looked at the wagging dog and lifted the fluttering chicken into Blackie's cage. It was a week before Coragio could stand on his own again. His wonderful voice was ruined forever, but soon everything else about him was working fine. Thereafter, first thing when Havy arrived at the barn, she would give him a lick. Al said that Coragio had had the breath knocked out of him. It was a common thing with birds going to window panes. All they needed was to rest a little and they'd revive. Bernie knew otherwise. That chicken was dead. Havy did something. Chapter 36. Dick decides on the dangerous voyage. It was a drizzly afternoon when Whittington resumed his story. The animals had come in. It smelled of wet horse, wet chicken, last summer's hay, manure.
Where we left off, Sir Lewis and his friends wanted Dick to make a trip like Marco Polo's. At the dinner where they laid out their plan, Dick saw Mary again. Sir Lewis had guessed Dick's interest in Mary. Over dinner, he'd announced that he had arranged for her to marry a gentleman of an old titled family. Dick felt sick. He tried to catch her eye. He could see that her face and neck were burning. She kept her eyes down. Sir Lewis went on about how important the voyage was for England. His words blew over Dick like so much wind. The cat pawed at his leg. He lifted her into his lap. She began to purr. He didn't notice. She clawed gently. Finally, she bit him. She had something to tell him. For the first time, he couldn't hear what his cat had to say. There was too much news. News of fortune, news of disappointment. Sir Lewis had picked a husband for the lovely girl. More than anything in the world, Dick wanted to be alone with her. What did the cat want to tell him? Ben asked. Nothing specific, just that she had a good feeling about the future. Dick couldn't hear her. His ears buzzed like someone in fever. Weeks went by. He couldn't decide about the venture. His old friend and partner was of two minds about it, too. Fitzwarren was past 60 now. He liked to work in his garden and relied on Dick to handle their business. He feared that if Dick made the trip, he might not see him again. Folks regarded the strapping lad as his son. Fitzwarren had come to think of him that way, too. Still, Fitzwarren was as curious as he was fearful. He had the true English spirit for risk-taking. Among other curiosities, Dick might encounter rhubarb and lilac on his way, two plants that were much wanted. Rhubarb is cooked into sauces, pies, and jams now. At Dick's time, the dried root was imported at great price to relieve constipation. Don't laugh. That's from me, not the book. Because the diet then was mainly meat and bread. Vegetables and salad were not popular. One cure for sluggish bowel was a purge of powdered rhubarb root in honey water. Dick had managed to obtain seeds of amapachari. Perhaps he would be as lucky with rhubarb. Fitzwarren wrote to a friend about it. What he heard was not encouraging. The country where the true sort lies is so remote between China and Tartary that to procure it is almost impossible, because no Europeans that I can learn trade thither. It is brought by the natives to Russians who lay nearest and have engrossed that trade. That was a little bit confusing, I think, possibly, but to recap it in perhaps modern speech, the friend that Fitzwarren wrote to kind of said that he would not be lucky to find rhubarb because it's only grown in a very specific place between China and another country. I don't think Tartary is really a country, but it's perhaps what they call Japan. And it's difficult to get the rhubarb because no Europeans can trade in that place. As for lilac, travelers from Algiers described a tall bush with heart-shaped leaves and bunched clusters of fragrant purplish-blue blossoms that perfumed an entire garden for weeks. According to one tradition, its name is Persian for beautiful girl. Fitzwarren longed to have it. He pressed his thumb against his nose and said Dick should go. And in case you don't remember, that's kind of one of his one of his habits of Fitzwarren. He presses his thumb against his nose when he's thinking, which is kind of funny. It's sort of uncomfortable to me. The more he thought about her, the more determined Dick became to see the girl in black. Will reported that she'd been sent to Sir Lewis's country place 10 miles outside London. He added that her suitor was a gentleman of rank and Dick should leave well enough alone. The morning he was to advise Sir Lewis, Fitzwarren, and the captains of his decision about the voyage, Dick set out on a different trip. He started walking up the Thames towpath to Richmond to find Mary. I hate to interrupt again, but the Thames, in case you don't know it, is the name of a very famous river in London, and it's pronounced Thames, but it's spelled Thames. It's very strange. And that's the River Thames. The tide was coming in. The river surged like a pulse, noisy and slipping, carrying branches, leaves, and trash. At places it surged across the path, His cat tried to follow. She couldn't keep up. Dick was unkempt. His step was not steady. He saw things and heard things in the river noise. Sunday bells began to ring. They filled his head. Deep bells, long bells. Bells with silver, bells of bronze. In their rhythms there was a message that seemed to come at him from every direction. Turn around, Dick Whittington, turn around. He kept walking, like a man confused. Then the river quieted, and all the bells stilled but one, a harsh, dry bell that called up his grandmother's face. It told one word, back, back. He turned around. He was sobbing as he had never done before in his life. Stumbling back down the river path, he met his cat. He stooped to pick her up. He would never forget the beautiful girl, but the strange fever that had possessed him had broken. We'll do one more chapter. Chapter 37, Ben's Decision. At the spring parents and teachers meeting, Ben's teacher told Marion she didn't think he should pass. His attendance was almost perfect. He made no trouble, and he picked up things they discussed in class. If he heard something, he would learn it. The problem was his reading. More and more classwork would be in books. If Ben couldn't read with the others, he wouldn't be able to manage. I'm amazed what he can memorize, though, she said. He's the best in the class at that. When it's time for free discussion, the other kids always ask him to recite. Almost every time he has something new. When Marion came home, she told Ben about the meeting. He didn't seem surprised or upset. She didn't know what to make of that. The next afternoon, he told Abby in the barn. Mrs. Wright told Gran they're going to keep me back. They aren't. Coach O has 20 sets of books I have to work through. She says if I'm reading in set 20 by the time school starts next fall, she'll recommend I stay with my class. She thinks I can do it if I start RR in May when school lets out. It's 14 weeks, my whole summer vacation. His voice dropped when he got to the vacation part. Abby whooped, the cat's tail went up, the horses snorted. There were cheers from all corners. You're going to be our missionary, the old one said. When he put it like that, Ben no longer felt bad about being one of the sentaways and giving up his vacation. He'd send himself. He'd be the missionary. The cat had seen it coming. He'd helped it along. He wasn't going to lose this boy. You're taking charge of yourself like Dick Whittington, the lady said. All hearts were full. We will stop there. We have, let's see. I think probably in the next video I will finish the book. It's not much longer left. And there's going to be a really cool end note too about Whittington. So hopefully I will have a last video for you tomorrow, which will be Saturday. Thank you guys so much for following along. I hope you've been enjoying it. Oh, and one thing to mention, I know sometimes it can feel a little scary if you feel like you're maybe behind in reading or in math or something like that, and you feel like maybe you wouldn't get to go on to the next grade. Well, just so you know, that doesn't really happen anymore. Very occasionally someone might repeat kindergarten or perhaps first grade, but other than that, it really doesn't happen. We really try hard to keep kids right where they're supposed to be with their friends and with their peers and classmates. So even if you're behind, even if you feel behind, because honestly, none of you are, you're all working at your own pace, and that's okay. Maybe you need extra time with something like reading or science or history at some point. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily behind. But even if you feel like you're not at the same place as everyone else is, that's not going to stop you from going on to a different grade. It's not going to stop you necessarily from passing a class. Your teachers are always here to help you, and they always want the best for you, and that's not going to be keeping you from going on with your friends. So that's just a little tidbit for you in case that's a fear you have or something. All right, stay tuned for the last video. I've really enjoyed this book, even though it's been different than I thought it would be. It's been a really cool one. All right, bye you guys.